I suppose, what is a resilient career? Resilience is basically about being able to bounce back from adversity. And a resilient career for me is one that tends to be quite versatile, actually, flexible, and serves the purpose of the person. Not anybody else, not big multinational companies, but the person themselves and their development. So Tom Hanks, interesting actor. Obviously, he's an award-winning actor, but his career has taken some interesting turns and unexpected ones along the way. So what can we learn from him? First of all, that you're probably going to play many parts in your own career. Hopefully, your career will be self-directed. So you're actually deciding what the important decisions you need to make are and when. That's not always the easiest thing to do. Number one, we're not always aware of what we're learning on our learning journey. And we don't sometimes see the opportunities that we have face on. Often we have to reflect back and look at ourselves in the rear-view mirror to see what were the important parts we played. But first off, we want to see, and ask the question, is life really like a box of chocolates? You don't know what you're going to get. Or are there aspects of careers that are actually quite predictable? And which are the skills that support us best? Often we confuse learning when we look at just the technical information that we want to gather or what courses should teach us, but we don't actually necessarily learn in a holistic way. So we're going to look at that today. How can we ensure that we make the most of our learning opportunities? And also, can we predict and what are expected to be the skills that will help us to advance our careers? Because like movies, we want to produce something and we want to produce a really good performance when it counts. And to do that, we can't just look at the technical courses we do or the previous jobs that we had necessarily. We have to look at ourselves from the point of view of the skills, competencies, the values, and particularly in the attitudes that we bring to bear at work. And can we change those if they're not working for us? So, let's look at how do we make our careers as resilient and rewarding as they can be and get top performances like Tom has done. So I see a few familiar faces in the audience who I spoke to earlier on. I don't know if you guys have any favourite Tom Hanks movies. I was born in Galway. I studied film production here, and that's always been my interest, is kind of using my interest in film as a lens into how we help people build their careers in a way that they perform best for the person, the individual themselves. And, first of all, we have to remind ourselves at times, careers can be, linear in that we qualify in something, we go in and work within a department relevant to that particular course, and things go smoothly for us. We climb up the corporate ladder as expected. But for most people, that isn't actually the case. It might look like it is. But even Tom Hanks, he was not the first choice for a lot of the parts that he played, like Forrest Gump. He wasn't the first choice. He wasn't even the second choice. And in fact, he took some really interesting decisions in his careers to work with directors that people didn't expect him to. We'll talk about some of those directors like Robert Zemeckis and so on later. But those little kinks or turns in your career, we're going to see more of them. And the reason for that is technology. The pace that technology is moving at means that we're faced with something called the half-life of knowledge. And that's the length of time what we know about a given subject area or even sector is likely to go out of date. And it means we need to be committed to lifelong learning. And Tom really, really is. And really, really was from the very beginning. So those turns might be, for example, a manager spotting a talent in you that you didn't spot yourself. They might be an opportunity coming along to move into another sector or move across into a different department. And it's quite likely that you won't need to have not one career path in mind for yourself, but be capable of multi-tracking. Have a few different directions that you're able to go in. And now we need to understand, how can we do that? How do we see ourselves, I suppose, with the holistic vision that we need to have a long-term career and a path maybe that isn't just straightforward and out of the book and someone else has done it ahead of us. Oftentimes those turns will happen, for instance, when a manager advocates for you. So maybe you come into the finance area, but you're more interested in marketing. You need a manager then who understands what you need and what your passions are, so they can help you make those turns and twists along the way. So we need to go out and see who's telling us about what future skills we should have. And two good places to look are UNESCO and the World Economic Forum. So let's look at what are called transversal skills and competencies. These are the skills and competencies, so what we can do that help us move successfully between jobs. So they're valuable in any job that we go into. They might be communication skills, complex problem-solving skills, project management skills, etc. really they're the ones that we particularly want to hone in on and understand how do we develop them and how do we get the performance we most want from ourselves, just like Tom can do. Here's a full list of them, and they're what I coach people on. And I suppose you're not going to see them necessarily outlined in any course that you do in college. But the good news is they're skills you develop whether you're in a paid job or not. Often you develop those skills even when you're working in a volunteer's capacity, and you develop them in one sector and don't realise how transferable they are to another. So today I've been talking to a few people, for example, who work in the hospitality industry, and probably possibly not realising the strengths they have to work in a very fast-paced environment where the customer is top of the value chain, and ones where, you know, small little mistakes in service are lost opportunities to help that customer. It's exactly the same within highly regulated sectors. What we're concerned about is using our lean methodologies, etc. How do we deliver the best value to our customers? And also, how do we be rigorous about how we do things so that we hopefully put on the best performance we can for them with a degree of consistency? That's why we have quality standards. But we're also quite complicated beings, right? We want to stay on track, and we'd like for people to say to us, here's the path you need to follow, and for it to be as, I suppose, clear as a railway track ahead of us. But the Polar Express train, if you remember this movie, wasn't a straightforward train. Yet we're driving it. We're driving our own careers. And mainly what we're doing is driving ourselves, our attitudes, our values, the assumptions we make about how careers work, as we saw earlier on. If you assume a career is going to be non-linear rather than linear, you're much more open-minded to opportunities, and you're much more focused on, you know, what it is that you're really offering to companies. So what you are is a set of polar opposites, and that's what you're trying to integrate and keep balanced. We're all capable of coming up and surprising ourselves at times, in good ways and in bad ways. And mainly what we need to do is try and keep ourselves on track as a person. So we need to look at that. We also want to, as I said, to talk about lifelong learning. What does that actually mean? Because we're going into the unknown here, folks. We're facing into manufacturing 4.0, and we're looking at jobs not existing now that in 5 years maybe 20% of people can be employed to do. So how do we get ahead of the track and see around the corner? And we also need, at the end of the day, to be able to demonstrate what we can do and self-explain and correct ourselves, particularly then when it matters most at interview. We need to be able to give a very, I suppose, clear and concise view of what our value proposition is. None of these things are easy, particularly when you're not having to give an Oscar-winning performance every day of the week. So how do you pull it out of the bag when you need to? So let's have a look at that. So the first thing we need to know about ourselves is, depending on which cognitive preference we favour, and cognition is about how we perceive and what we believe. That's the shortest way I can put it, or the simplest way I can put it. And we each favour really one of four ways of looking at things. And we could map ourselves very easily around that. If we, I suppose, look at the intuitive side, first of all, how we approach our careers can be very much based on being able to imagine what a future us might look like. So we might need a coach to help us then with imagining where we want to be in 3 years' time. We might have a really good feel for that ourselves. But when it comes to then a thinking person, you might be a thinking approach to your careers where you find it easy to objectively look at what are the maybe education or the pieces of technical knowledge I need to get me where I need to go. A sensing person is very practical. So they're going to look and see, these are all the range of options open to us. And really at the moment, that's part of, I suppose, the difficulties. There's nearly too many choices available around education and work. But a sensing person will make their decisions based around what's the most practical options for me. Be it I want to stay in Galway, what are the sectors that will give me the longest, I suppose, stability around my career, if that's important. And then a person who makes a choice around their feelings. We're not just talking about emotions in this stage, we're much more talking about values. So they will make a really good subjective decision around what will really give me probably the best return from the point of view of a company that I can identify with. They have the same value systems as I have, and the principles that they put in place are the ones that are going to make me feel I'm motivated to go to work every day. And obviously then we veer towards being either more introverted or more extroverted. We're not just one or the other, we're degrees of. So we're a complicated enough system to manage. You know, we're as complex and adaptive as any system we'll have to manage in industry. And we are somewhere there in the middle of all of that, mapping around, okay, what do we need to balance? So we need to balance those four things to make the right career choices for us. So that's what we're trying to do. It's looking at how we perceive the world and also how we make decisions, and knowing each of us is unique. We have a unique set of talents and temperaments, and also, you know, we're in a unique position at any given time in our career. We want to be able to take a snapshot of that, but also be able to look back and future map out what we require, you know, what we want to most meet our values. Okay, so let's have a look at this then. Based on my cognitive preferences, I know it's going to influence a lot of things. It'll influence, first of all, how do I see the world panning out? What do I expect? If I do X, will be the result Y for my career in 2 or 3 years' time. I also need to be aware of how do I take in information. So am I more veering towards the facts of the matter or more around the future from the point of view of the possibilities that, you know, this opportunity will open up for me? How we make decisions is really influenced by which preferences that we have around how we take in information and make decisions too. And obviously it's really handy to know, are we coming at solving problems and opportunities and different puzzles that we meet day to day at work from the inside out or the outside in? And if it's the inside out, it means there's very small changes we might be able to make around our assumptions about careers and how they work, our own values, that will get us quite a different performance. If we take an outside-in point of view, we're looking at what are the tiny changes I need to make from a behaviours or habits point of view, what are the small actions I could take that will give me the performance I want. So we actually need to take both. So I'll give you a really simple example. If you get in the habit of going to bed every night at 10 o'clock on working days, you're going to get 2 really good quality hours of sleep before midnight. That mean that you wake up for work the next day more refreshed than the average person will be. That's a tiny habit to do 4 days a week, and the return in it is pretty exponential, and it could have a massive impact on your quality of concentration at work. We're seeing more and more adults, for example, being diagnosed with attention deficit disorder, but in fact they may be being misdiagnosed later in life, because mostly what people are suffering from nowadays is attention fatigue. Because what we're doing is we're having way too many options of fun things to do and entertaining things to do after 9 o'clock at night. That means we're actually tired when we wake up in the morning and we're not stimulated by the work that is presented to us. So really, career and lives are intertwined. It's often about the tiny changes we can make on the inside or outside, and the very small distinctions that we make between our values and what's important to us or not. And that's, I think, what Tom Hanks probably exemplifies most of all. So when Tom, for example, chose to work on The Polar Express, which is a movie I don't particularly like the look of, the main reason might surprise us of why he picked that movie, and it was simply that he knew the technology and direction would be innovative. So if you're an engineer, you might be interested in the fact that there were 4 Viacom camera systems used to make that movie. At any given frame, they had a 10-foot square and 45 cameras focused, because they had about 6 new systems that had never been developed before that they integrated to make that movie. And I didn't particularly like the look of it, but if that movie hadn't been made and Zemeckis hadn't figured out that technology, then movies I do like Avatar, they would never have been made. So sometimes we have to look at ourselves that way too. We're a work in progress. We are sometimes taking particular jobs because they'll give us either an exposure to technology, a familiarity with integration of systems, for example, or something that, you know, is still a work in progress in order for us to get to where we want to be, you know, a few years down the line. So sometimes we need to take a step back. Maybe even if we were a manager, step back into a non-managerial role. But in so doing, picking the right particular courses that will help us, and trainings and learnings. So for me, I've been made redundant. I've been a manager and not done well, and gone back into a non-managerial role and learned there how to influence without authority. And that was just the one particular skill I needed to take a big jump into a director role the next time. So all of these are subtle, but they're important. And the good news is we don't have to do them alone. In fact, the thing that these two Tom movies had in common was, in both these movies, if you remember, the person was pushed into extremes. They were facing a situation they'd never faced before, where they had to deal with new challenges on a day-to-day basis, and more or less alone, for different reasons. One was future dystopian science fiction movie, and the other was Castaway, where he was left on a desert island on his own, having been in a really regulated work environment with DHL, I think it was beforehand. But he did the same thing in both these movies, or at least the character he played did. They invented another person to relate to. And that's what we need to learn most about our careers, is most of what we learn that's valuable, we learn from other people and through our own identity being activated in, I suppose, interaction with others. We don't know ourselves except really by relating to other people and seeing how we behave and observing that behaviour and then changing it as we need to. And what it doesn't mean is that we shouldn't be just comparing ourselves to others. That's not what I'm talking about. In fact, the only person you should ever compare yourself to is who you were a month before, or 6 months before, a year before. And you're at least 3 different people. You're your individual self, your own personality. Like I said, you have preferences for how you see the world and what you believe is right. You're your relational self, so how you relate, be you as a manager or a colleague, a peer to other people, you're there to help them learn too. But then you also need to be able to relate to the collective sense. Once you have your degree in science, whether you've worked in industry or in a lab is irrelevant. You are a scientist. If you want to get a job as a scientist, then you need to start thinking scientifically about your life and being able to show that you do. And that means being analytical, that means being methodical, that means respecting the body of work that's come behind you, because we're all standing on the shoulders of giants as scientists or engineers, or in any profession we're in, we need to be interested in what's excellence look like in my profession, and can I meet somebody who tells and can explain that to me and what that looks like on a day-to-day basis. Your informal social work networks are just as important as your social ones. Speaking personally, probably some of the best jobs I've ever got was because I was standing on the side of a hurling pitch on a given day and somebody remembered me and had worked for me before. And if you don't get out there and be seen and have a bit of a profile one way or the other, people don't think of you. It's not that they forget you because you're not good. It's just that they're human, and we all have memories that work like lossy compression algorithms. They just don't retain everything, right? So be seen. And also realize, there are 3 types of people in the world, apparently. I hate to oversimplify, but I will in this case. There's the givers, the takers, and what we call the matchers. So the givers always give more than they take. The takers always take more than they give. And the matchers tend to be quite smart and looking and giving just as much as they take and keeping it fairly regulated. But in fact, when we look at who are the most successful people in their careers, it might surprise you. It's not the matchers and it's not the takers. It's the givers. The givers are both, unfortunately though, the most successful and the least successful. And the difference is actually that the givers who are the most successful are the ones who know when to ask for help. And so that's why I'd encourage you to go talk to the coaches, ask for help today, and, make sure that you have people supporting you, because it's not a solo mission that you're on. It never will be. We are social creatures for a reason. We're our best when we're together, when we're working together. The bad news is we don't always know what we don't know. So for our learning journeys, we need to start with not knowing what we don't know is unconscious incompetence. And that's a difficult place to be. It's a risky place to be. It's where you are when you have your degree or you've come out of a job that you knew inside out and you were there for 10 years, and now you're coming out into this big world of opportunity, but you don't even know where to start and what questions to ask. So, ask, where do I start when you meet the coaches today? Then you get to a stage in jobs where you're consciously incompetent. And we all feel that at times. We go into something and we feel, I'm in over my head here. Why do they hire me to do that? Good. That means you're aware that you're consciously incompetent and you will be a really good learner. So that's not a risky place to be. conscious competence is a great place to be. If you're a technician and you've been trained up and you have a year experience on a really, maybe it's a complicated automated piece of equipment that you know how to troubleshoot well, and you're now conscious and confident, going to work every day is a pleasure. You are in your flow state. The bad news is the longer you stay in that job, the more you're going to move into the last quadrant, the blue space of unconscious competence. You cannot go out and do a good interview because you've been doing what you've done for so long, you can no longer tell the difference between an average performance on that job and an optimum performance on that job. If you didn't get to that state, that would be bad too, because you wouldn't be able to turn around and face unexpected things and solve unexpected problems. But the difficulty is when you have a lot of experience in one job for a long time or one company for a long time, you no longer know what you know either. So you're in a risk space too. So how do we keep ourselves in that yellow zone, hopefully? And, smart managers know we're in it, because if they have new people starting, they often don't ask somebody who's 20 years in the company to induct and train this person. They often ask people who are like 1 or 2 years in the company to do it, because they know it's fresher why they're doing something. And I suppose that's the key thing. We sometimes forget to ask why. So we go into jobs at operator level in companies and we don't realise how sophisticated the machine we're working in is and why things are being done that way. So we're doing a routine job. I was talking to people earlier on who were kind of giving me examples of this. And you don't realise that it is routine because somebody was able to make it routine for you in order that less mistakes would be presented to the customer or patient at the end of the day. So we need to encourage ourselves to complete our learning journeys. And how we do that is we realise, first of all, that we're on a journey. And actually there's 4 steps in that journey. And the first step is maybe the green zone there. Okay, we see and do and feel a task. And we're hands-on, maybe involved. But then we do also need to stand back and ask, well, what just happened? Why was I doing it that way? What's the bigger picture that fits in on? I'll give you an example from something like let's say you are a cleaning operator in a pharmaceutical company and you are swabbing pieces of equipment in what we call dirty hole time. Then you need to be able to stand back because the job itself maybe doesn't seem that complicated to you. You're taking swabs, you're documenting, you're labeling, you're getting it to the lab, but you're not asking enough to see, okay, what's the overall validation master plan that this job fits into? Why are we doing this? And then maybe you do that and you become a little bit more familiar with, why that job exists in the first place. Then you need to figure out, well, for instance, there's parameters around everything that I'm doing. Who sets those parameters and limits? If their endotoxin limit's been measured, why are the parameters set there and not something different? If, for instance, we have data and we see that everything is within its limits but it's trending, then we also want to get into the blue zone of how would I do that differently now? Does that have a bearing on how I would do things the next time? So completing all these journeys is about having the concrete experience, but then looking back on it to put it in perspective, understanding where the abstract concepts that underlie how this works, and they might be quality standards, for example, or principles around biological systems, etc. And then going, okay, let's say I want to go and do this job in a different place that has different conditions and different constraints. How would I need to do my job differently? To be ready for interview, you have to have looked at your job from those 4 different perspectives. So you need to be able to look at yourself and your skills holistically. And, don't take my word for it, take Tom's word for it. Because Tom will be the first to tell you, we mainly learn from each other. We can't keep a 4D image all the time of what we're doing. But because, thankfully, we're all different enough, we all have a different angle. So talk to the other people around you, or even somebody who did the job 3 years ago, and spot the difference and join the dots. Why are things been done to this degree of rigour now that weren't before? What's changed maybe from the standards point of view that caused the job to be done differently? So both Tom and Denzel, Oscar winners, but there's nice difference between how they act actually and what skills they apply. And there's differences between us too. But one of the most important things is our confidence level and our belief in ourselves. So where does that come from? That's different for each profession actually. So engineers are going to draw their sense of confidence in themselves and their mastery of skills differently than maybe a scientist is, and it's good if you understand those differences. But fundamentally, it comes back to our own belief system about ourselves and what we think is important. They influence everything else, actually. So as Henry Ford said, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. In other words, ambition and high expectations are different. High expectations come from basically a sense of entitlement. I have this degree, I should be getting these jobs. Ambition has a subtle but big difference in the sense that ambition is about, I know what I want and I know how I'm going to get there, and I'm also confident in the steps that I need to take to reach that goal. So they are different, and we need to make sure we understand those differences and what they mean for what our goals are. So let's do a little test, because sometimes what we believe careers are about is what's causing us problems in the first place. So let's imagine what we think our career is about is that we do jobs for a certain number of years and then we either get promoted or we're going to leave. What that produces then is that really after that 2 years, you've mentally left that job already, okay? So you're not going to invest and develop yourself as much as you could. And that is why you then don't progress. And that's a belief loop that we need to get rid of. It's broken and it isn't going to work in our favour. And it often, we find with all systems, feedback loops are positive or negative, they're reinforcing or they're balancing, and they come together and work in different ways. And this is another similar one. And when these two work together, they make your career plateau. They stop you learning. So you do need to sometimes learn to unlearn. And that's not the same as forgetting. That's understanding what are my assumptions about things and the models I have that are out of date, and I need to get rid of them. So this is a much better one. If you assume your career is non-linear, well then you actually do invest in each opportunity that you have so that you are progressing the role. That is your, that's where you're going to learn the most. It's not when you're doing things based on the job description to the letter, but where you're understanding how does this role need to evolve to support the functions and the customer better and the processes and my colleagues, people around me. So this is it. At the end of the day, our brains don't work always the way we think they work, and that's what drives some bad career choices. Facts and figures are important, but when it comes to going for interviews, stories are much more powerful, and we need to write our own stories. And we need to make sure that they're good stories, because the most important stories and the plots behind any movie are really, I suppose, what we believe most ourselves, and the stories we tell ourselves have the most powerful influence on us, because our brains are much more active in listening to stories than they are facts and figures. So Tom has played 5 characters in one of the movies in the Polar Express. He actually played 6 characters in this movie called Cloud Atlas. But what was interesting was that even though there was a big spread of time frames for these movies, they all connected very nicely one to another to give us a very important message. And that's what we want to do at Interview. We want to have 6 stories ready in advance that taken together give a holistic view of what's most important to us. Because that's what the company is hiring really, is at the end of the day, we are the last line of defence between them and putting a patient at risk or putting one of their customers at risk. So what we value becomes their values, and they need to see that they're aligned. So use your STAR method where you're able to explain in 6 stories who you are and what you have to offer and what values you stand for. So the ST is situation and task, A is your actions, which should be the bulk of your answer, and R is the results. If you structure all your interview answers in that way, and these are to answer competency-based questions like, tell me about how you work within a team. Give me an example of where you solved a difficult problem. Etc., etc. There's so many different STAR questions you could be asked, or competency questions you could ask, but the structure of the story is very, very important. Otherwise, you won't get the impact that you want from it. So have 6 prepared in advance. I've given you 2 of them there. Other one might be, give me an example of where attention to detail was important. Another might be, give me a scenario where you had to make an ethical decision, where you're faced with a moral dilemma at work. And very simple examples can be very, very powerful, actually. You need to pick the right ones and rehearse them so that when you go in for interview, 80% of what you're going to say you already know. And then you can afford to be confident about it. So I think everybody can be a hero within their own career. That's my coaching model. But we have to believe that we can. And then we need to have, I suppose, a bit of faith. But we also need to understand the subtle difference between something like hope and optimism and efficacy and resilience and all those things. They sound like nice words, but there are key distinctions to be made between them. So most of all, what I'd say to you is, be open to the fact that, life isn't always going to be, or careers, exactly what you expect it to be. It's not a case of you go to college, you start off in your career and everything is just in a straight line from there. In fact, if it is, I'd almost be more worried about you. Also, you need to realise that staying on track isn't about fulfilling anybody else's expectations of you or what you should be doing, but it's about fulfilling your own beliefs and values and forming those. We're all a work in progress. In fact, most skills can be learnt. It doesn't matter that you got a C in something in college. That does not mean that, or you got an average degree or something. It has no bearing whatsoever on what you can achieve in industry. In fact, even if we just look at college performance, IQ is only about as important as as something else that I'm going to talk about in a second, and that's curiosity when it comes to actually predicting performance well. So give yourself the benefit of the doubt. Like in the Green Mile, if you remember poor John Coffey, he was assumed to be guilty rather than innocent. You do need to be compassionate to your future self. It's about being curious about who you are, actually. And who you are is probably the most difficult question you're ever asked at interview. And it's your life journey is figuring that out. You don't need to have it all worked out now or even in 10 years' time. But what you do need to work out is what's going to match your natural curiosity, because that's what you were designed to be as a curious creature, with your competency so that you get the performance that you want. So often the difference is, let's give an example of engineers going into management positions. How an engineer, what we've realised now is curious engineers sometimes do and sometimes don't become good managers. But what makes a big difference are a number of things. Number one is the diversity of companies that they've worked for, okay? That they haven't stayed with one particular company for a long period of time in their careers. And I don't mean job hopping, but I mean a variation between startup companies, companies that have come through merger and acquisition, more established companies, etc. So there's a degree of variation there. They also need to manage a wide range of business and technical scenarios. So that's important. And they also need a lot of perseverance, so that curiosity gets you so far, but then you also need to be quite stress tolerant, because learning is by its nature uncomfortable. You have to go outside of your own your comfort zone to actually learn, because learning is effectively the friction between our experience and our expectancy. So that's not an easy place to be. And finally, you need to know that you can self-direct your learning journey and also your learner identity. If you know what your preferences are around how you think and take in information, then you know an awful lot about your learning style preferences as well. And it equips you then better to realise what you need. Say in my case, personally, I like abstract conceptualization. I like principles and a lot of research behind the ideas that I implement. But I'm not always the most practical. So I need to be reminded to put those into tools and checklists that people can actually use, not for them just to be something nice that I can, philosophize about forever. So yes, first of all, be curious about yourself. And even if you use that framework there, the who, what, how, and why, apply that framework to every job you do and your job search as well. Who am I? Am I clear about that? And am I clear about my values when I go for an interview? What are the skills that I have and what are the skills I want to develop? How am I going to do that? And why am I doing this in the first place? Go through those kind of questions with yourself. If they sound familiar, they should, because all the lean methodologies that we teach engineers, they're all based around ensuring that we have a 4D approach to things. And they're there to encourage you asking those kind of questions in the first place. So that's what I would say, is be sure of your why. That will be the biggest prediction of your career success. And it's not something that you necessarily have to work out together. You'll figure it out based on close observation of yourself, but mainly working with other people and also exposing yourself to new situations and new learning opportunities as you go along. So that's who I am. I'm more than happy to talk to those of you I haven't already spoken to, and it's been a pleasure so far. I'm upstairs, come and talk to me. And I'll be putting on a new hat as of Monday. So from Monday, I'll be running an engineering skill net on behalf of IBEC. So I'm happy to talk to companies too in relation to how do they round off the learning experiences of their own staff so that they can attract the type of people they want and retain them. And there's a lot of new supports available. You know, people are probably aware of Springboard but might not realise Springboard is also for people who are in full-time employment. There are many courses now that give you what we call micro-credentials. So you don't have to sign your life away working, doing loads of evening study for a master's. You can build single certificate modules around your lifestyle and what you want to do. And for companies, we want to find out what are the newest learnings that we have on how people develop skills so that we can develop bespoke skills and learning pathways for the companies too. So guys, come and talk to me about any of those things. If you're an individual or you're a company who wants individuals to learn as much as possible when working with them, more than happy to talk to any of you. Okay, so thanks guys.
Thank you so much, Fiona, for that.